New York Giants running back Saquon Barkley was seen on Instagram running on the beach, cutting and catching passes. Let's talk about Saquon's 2021 fantasy outlook with SI senior fantasy analyst Michael Fabiano. Fabs, the news that Saquon was working out on the beach, it's important because, hey, this is a guy that had major knee reconstructive surgery a year ago after missing, everything after week 2 after he tore his ACL. What does history tell us about running backs returning a year later coming off this injury?
Well, the good thing from a fantasy perspective is that in recent years, we haven't really seen elite running backs go down with the ACLs. And then Barkley's injury happened. And remember, this is not only just the ACL, he damaged his MCL and his meniscus as well. So he did a lot of damage to that knee in that game against the Chicago Bears. So let's look back to 2000. So we're looking back about 20 years. And we have seen guys like Edgerrin James, Jamal Lewis, Deuce McAllister, Ronnie Brown, Noshawn Marino, Rashard Mendenhall tear their ACLs, come back. Some of these guys had good numbers, but they weren't elite numbers, right? Edgerrin James fell off a cliff the year after his ACL. Then he came back and was a star. Jamal Lewis had a pretty good season after his torn ACL, but if you remember, that game happened in the preseason, so he didn't even make it to the regular season the previous year. Deuce McAllister was pretty good after his first ACL tear, but not elite. Ronnie Brown was having a massive season the year he tore his ACL. Things went downhill from there. Now, we have had a couple of instances, Bill, where running backs have come back and been just as good or better. And Adrian Peterson is the prime example of that, right? He tore his ACL and he tore it late. And what did he do? He rushed for over 2,000 yards the following season. I feel like that Adrian Peterson is not a human being. He's made of adamantium. Whatever it is, the guy is a physical specimen, right? Jamal Charles, remember, he tore his ACL against the Detroit Lions several years back. He came back and finished as the RB9. So he was still pretty good. But we have seen more cases than not where a running back tears his ACL and then comes back and is not the same the next season. Once again, though, a lot of these injuries happened years ago. We've seen a lot of advances in terms of ACL repairs and medical technology. So Saquon, who is also a physical freak, just like Adrian Peterson, maybe he comes back from it a little bit more like AP or like Jamal Charles instead of an Edgerrin James or a Ronnie Brown, for example.
Let's talk about expectations with Saquon, because I think last year he missed 14 games. He played it basically 6 quarters, suffering that ACL injury. So he was a disappointment. I don't want to call him a bust. He was injured. He was a disappointment in 2020. He's also a disappointment in 2019. He really didn't live up to those expectations. He was dealing with a high ankle sprain. That kept him out for a handful of weeks. But if you go back to his rookie season, he had over 2,000 yards from scrimmage. He had over 90 catches, and I think he had around 15 touchdowns. Our fantasy football players hanging on to that magical rookie season that he had.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. That's absolutely happening. And Saquon's young. He's at 24 years old. He's still in the prime of his career, but you can't chase the rookie season. You can't do it. Part of his success was as a pass catcher, as you mentioned. He had 91 catches. He had 121 targets. Now, that year, his quarterback was Eli Manning. He threw the ball to his running backs 26% of the time. That's a pretty good percentage. In Daniel Jones's first 2 years in the NFL, 16.5% of the time he's throwing the ball to the running backs. If Saquon Barkley gives you 50 catches in 2021, that's a great season. If Saquon Barkley gives you 400 yards as a pass catcher, that's a great season. Those numbers are far removed from what he did in his rookie campaign, as you mentioned, with over 2,000 scrimmage yards. And he did have Odell Beckham Jr. and Evan Engram on that team. But remember, OBJ got hurt and missed 4 games. Evan Engram got hurt and missed 5 games. And the number 3 wide receivers for the Giants during Saquon's rookie year were a combination of Benny Fowler, Corey Coleman, and Russell Shepard. Not very good.
Let's talk about some of the Giant playmakers that are on the roster for this 2021 season. They added a dynamic group of receivers, right? They brought in Kenny Golladay off free agency. They drafted Kadarius Toney out of Florida, and then they signed tight end Kyle Rudolph. So they're putting pieces around quarterback Daniel Jones, but how is that going to help Saquon?
I don't know that it's going to, right? And you forgot about John Ross. How dare you? Of course, we've all forgotten about John Ross at this point, right? But the Giants have more talent on this roster than they did in Saquon's rookie year. And again, I mentioned OBJ missed 4 games. Evan Ingram missed 5 games. So there was a lot asked of Saquon Barkley, and he performed very admirably, right? We saw it. He was tremendous. He was the RB1. But now, do the Giants have to lean on him as much? I'm not saying he's not going to be a featured back. He absolutely still will be, and he will lead this team in backfield touches by a mile unless he gets hurt. But he hasn't been that durable over the last couple of seasons, missing time with the knee, with the high ankle sprain. You bring in Kenny Galladay, like you mentioned, he is going to get plenty of targets. Evan Ingram will see his targets. We didn't even mention Sterling Shepard, Darius Slayton also in the mix. The Giants have a lot of mouths to feed, and we've also seen reports, Bill, that they may bring Saquon back somewhat slowly. Remember, now we have 17 games to play, so maybe Saquon starts off slowly. I just don't know that the workload will be what it was in his rookie campaign, and I certainly don't think he's going to be targeted as much. And one last thing as it pertains to Saquon Barkley, the Giants' offensive line is garbage, all right? In fact, Pro Football Focus ranked it the number 32 offensive line going into 2021. The last time I checked, Bill, there are 32 teams in the National Football League, so that offensive line's got some question marks.
Certainly does. And listen, we're not calling Saquon Barkley a bust. We are just giving everyone out there a little bit of a warning. Just have some caution when it comes to where you're going to draft Saquon Barkley. He's going to be a first rounder, just a matter of where. And if you're listening to Michael Fabiano, you might pass on him in some of those top 5 picks. Plenty more fantasy football analysis. It's all about Sports Illustrated. Go check it out. si.com/fantasy.